Well, let's look at the wider picture a little bit. For more political analysis, we're joined by the Conservative councillor Holly Whitbread and also the broadcaster Matthew Stadler. Matthew, we'll start with you. This is your party. They're going to be feeling triumphant. Pat McFadden, Labour Party campaign coordinator, will be on this programme in about an hour's time. He's going to sleep well tonight.
It was a good night for Labour, no question about it. I was in earlier this week in this very studio, and it was a pretty dicey start to the week for Keir Starmer. Negative headlines. Had Labour really changed? And then, of course, yesterday we get the news that we've gone into recession. So Rishi's recession, as Labour are now pitching it. And you get this double thumping in the by-elections.
Do you honestly believe, though, in terms of the economic news, did that play into the by-elections? I don't think it did.
I'm not saying it did play into these by-elections, although you can't rule it out because it happened bang on the day that people were going to the polls. My point is that this is double bad news for Sunak. A double whammy within the by-elections, plus we go into recession. This was the man who was Chancellor of the Exchequer. The whole point of Rishi Sunak is he had been Chancellor, he was the guy who was supposed to get the economy, and instead of growth, instead of growing the economy, as he pledged at the beginning of last year, we are now going into recession. We've gone into recession. One
of his big 5 pledges to grow the economy. Listening to that is the Conservative councillor Holly Whitbread. Holly, you've heard what Matthew Stadler's just had to say. A double sort of disaster for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, there's no wrapping it up that these were really difficult results last night. I mean, I actually went to campaign in Wellingborough and actually knocking on the doors, there wasn't a sense of people being anti-Conservative. Actually, there was a lot of people who wanted a reason to vote Conservative, who had done historically, but certainly weren't going to come out this time in support. So they are difficult results. I mean, one thing that you can see, certainly in the Kingswood by-election, is that if you vote Reform, unfortunately, you get Labour.
Well, I mean, many people would take issue with that, Holly, but just in terms of where we are, Rishi Sunak is at his lowest point in terms of popularity. The latest poll from Reuters says 70% of people think he's unfit to be Prime Minister and to lead the Conservative Party.
I mean, yesterday was a really difficult day for the Conservative government and for Rishi as we entered a recession. And I think that was the news that people felt coming certainly in their pockets, but all dreaded. So I think that certainly has a bearing on poll ratings for Rishi. But at the end of the day, the Conservative government do have a plan. I mean, they're working on those key policies, particularly around immigration and stopping that illegal immigration and the boat crossing.
They've been in power for 13 years, and you can't keep saying, oh, well, we've got a plan. Wait for the plan. The plan is working. We're in recession. It's not working.
Well, they have been in power for 13 years, absolutely. But we have gone through one of the most difficult times this country has ever had. We've had a pandemic which has cost the nation billions of pounds, which was completely unexpected. And then we had war in Ukraine, which has led to spiralling inflation. So it's been an incredibly difficult time. And what we're doing is trying to work our way out of that. And we've got the budget coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So hopefully we see something positive there to give people a little bit of hope and a reason to come back and vote Conservative.
Holly, it's interesting you were campaigning in Wellingborough. Did you feel sort of supported by your party in doing that? Because what we're hearing is that the Conservative Party thought, actually, it's better for us to kind of take our foot off the gas and make it look like we didn't try that hard.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a campaign effort on the ground. There was a couple of us out knocking on doors. You know, the Conservatives field candidates in every single election. And when I was knocking on doors, I was certainly kind of campaigning on a national platform, particularly around reducing those boat crossings.
Matthew, what do you make of that comment that if you vote for Reform, you're basically voting for Labour? I think many people would take an issue with that.
Well, you take issue with it, David. Let's be really clear.
Well, I take issue with it, but also, surely, this is a terrible state of British politics where you're saying you have to vote for the least worst party. This should be a positive vote when you vote. Also, just in terms of those swings, the Labour Party did very well in these 2 by-elections. Now, you have to get over 12.7% swing according to get a majority, to get a small majority in the general election. Does this bode well, or are by-elections notoriously difficult to interpret?
I think people across the country are waking up this morning and getting just a taste of what it would be like later in the year at the general election if we wake up and you get a Labour government. I think you're spot on, though, about the splitting of the vote on the right. OK, so that if, as the correspondent said, if you add the Conservative and the Reform Party votes together, That's more than what Labour got. The Tories are desperate. You're right, they are now waging a counter-offensive against reform because there is this real worry, and we've seen it there, of a split of the vote on the right. Whereas on the left, if you see the Lib Dems as, roughly speaking, on the left, and I think they'd see themselves as progressive, there's a real sense that people are going to be voting tactically. Let's make no bones about this. The Wellingborough result is thought to be the biggest swing in any British election since the war.
I think it's not thought to be. I think it is. The problem for the Labour Party is all the people who are now not voting for the Conservatives, let's say in Wellingborough, who did previously, they're not all switching over to Labour. They're being attracted elsewhere. So what do they do to try and soak up some of that support? Because it's not good enough for the Labour Party. It might be good enough to win a general election. Well, let's see what happens. For them to rest on dissatisfaction with the Conservatives.
No, Labour can't afford to rest on anything, Rosie. Labour absolutely have to make the case for a Labour government. And I suspect if you go around the country and you ask people, what does Keir Starmer stand for, there are still gaps.
They're not sure how to answer that question.
They're not quite sure, a lot of people. And I want him to make that case more strongly than he has so far. But remember, in 1997, one of the reasons that Tony Blair got that landslide for Labour was because Tory voters stayed at home. And I think that is going to play a huge role this time, except they now have reform to vote for if they actually want to get out and put an X in the ballot box.
Well, also, of course, Tony Blair was more of a centrist. He attracted people from the Conservative Party that may not have voted for Labour before. Let's just go back to you, Holly. When you look at the latest polling, the multi-regression poll that was carried out recently, 18,000 people, the results for the Conservative Party are devastating. It shows the Conservative Party would all pretty much be wiped out with just 80 seats. Now, Rishi Sunak has 5 pledges. He's failed on 4 of those.
Always need to take with a bit of a pinch of salt. I think things always tend to change and shift as you actually get into the election, and actually the reality of one changing government, but also some of the threats in those elections. But as I say, it's been an incredibly difficult time. And where we have seen progress is with inflation coming down. We've seen some progress, although much more needs to be made around those illegal boat crossings, particularly in relation to the Albanians who were crossing the channel. So we have seen some progress. But what I would say is a week is a long time in politics, let alone a couple of months. So Rishi's still got time to get some stuff done and actually put forward a vision which is hopeful for the future as well, and get people to vote for him.
In terms of the future, Holly, Keir Starmer's been saying this morning these 2 results show that the British public have got confidence in him, not in Rishi Sunak. It's going to be quite tricky to unpick some of that sentiment in however many months you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said before, by-elections are a different kettle of fish. You always get that level of protest vote. You also get less people going out to vote as well. And I think when people actually know that their vote is going to change the government, that does kind of change the mindset of the voter. But certainly there is a lot more to do before the election. And hopefully we see some really positive policies in the upcoming budget and the manifesto when it's formed as well.
Matthew, I think for those people who may be toying with the idea of voting for the Labour Party, can Keir Starmer convince them that he is a man of conviction? Here we see, again, Captain Flip-Flop. We saw the £28 billion pledge being dropped. We've already sort of said that many people don't know what the Labour Party stands for. Doesn't Keir Starmer actually have to be far more charismatic to stand there to say, these are our positive policies and this is my vision for Britain?
Well, he has got these sort of 5 basic areas, these 5 basic pledges. He has done some flip-flopping, but he would cast this as reassuring people that if the facts change, so does Labour's policy ahead of the election, right? So that he would argue that the Tories have dragged us into recession, they've dragged us backwards, so he can't continue to pledge 28 billion quid a year, because that's just not feasible.
But he supported it until, what, 3 days before he dropped it?
He did. But what he's trying to do is show that Labour are a party of economic stability. That is one of the 5 key pledges, along with getting Britain building again, a greener economy, securing our borders, rebuilding the NHS. That's what he'd say, but he needs to get these messages out more loudly and more clearly.
And that if that pledge on green investment was going to hurt the votes, it didn't hurt that much in the last 2 by-elections.
No.
For now, Matthew, thank you so much. And Holly Whitbread as well. Thank you so much, Conservative councillor.